The Lord has come into his world. Nay, nay, that cannot be. The world is full of noisomeness and all iniquity. The Lord, thrice holy is his name, he cannot touch this thing of shame. The Lord has come into his world. Ah, then he comes in might, the sword of fury in his hands, with vengeance all bedight. O wretched world, thine end draws near, prepare to meet thy God in fear. The Lord has come into his world. What, in that baby sweet? That broken man, acquaint with grief, those bleeding hands and feet? He is the Lord of all the earth. How can he stoop to human birth? The Lord has come into his world. A slaughtered lamb I see, a smoking altar on which burns a sacrifice for me. He comes, O blessed day, he comes to take my sin away. End of The Advent by B.B. Warfield.
Once upon a time, the animals decided to have a Christmas tree, and this was how it came about. The swifts and the swallows and the chimneys in the country houses, awakened from their sleep by joy and laughter, had stolen down and peeped in upon scenes of happiness, the center of which was always an evergreen tree covered with wonderful fruit, bright balls of many colors, and sparkling threads of gold and silver, lying like beautiful frostwork among the green fir needles. A sweet, fairy-like figure of a Christ child or an angel rested high among the branches, and underneath the tree were dolls and sleds and skates and drums and toys of every sort, and furs and gloves and tippets, ribbons and handkerchiefs, and all the things that boys and girls need and like. And all about this tree were gathered always little children, with faces, oh, so full of wonderment and expectation, changing to radiant, sparkling merriment, as toys and candies were taken off the tree or from underneath its boughs and distributed among them. The swifts and swallows told their feathered friends all about it, and they told others, both birds and animals, until at last it began to be rumored through all the animal world that on one day in the year the children of men were made wonderfully happy by means of some sort of festival, which they held about a fir tree from the forest. Now, of course, the tame animals and the house animals, the dogs and the cats and the mice, knew something more about this festival, but then they did not exchange visits with the wild animals, because they felt themselves above them. They were always trying to be like men and women, putting on airs and pretending to know everything, but after all, they were animals, and could not help making friendships now and then with the wild creatures, especially when the men and women were not there. And when they were asked about the Christmas tree, they told still more wonderful stories than the swifts and the swallows from the chimneys had told, for some of them had taken part in these festivals, and some had even received presents from the tree, just like the children. They said that the tree was called a Christmas tree because that strange fruit and that wonderful frosting came on it only in the Christmas time, and that the Christmas time was the time when men and women, and little children too, were always kind and good and loving, and gave things to one another. And they said, moreover, that on the Christmas tree grew the things which everyone wanted, and which would make them happy, and that it was so, because in the Christmas time everyone was trying to make everyone else happy, and to think of what other people would like. This, they said, was what they had seen and heard told about Christmas trees. They did not quite understand why it was so, but they knew that the Christmas tree, when rightly made, brought the Christmas spirit, and they had heard men say that the Christmas spirit was the great thing, and that was what made everyone happy. Well, the long and short of it was that the animals talked of it in their dens and on their roosts, in the fields and in the forests, wild beasts and tame alike, the cows and the horses in their stalls, the sheep in their fold, the doves in their cotes, and the poultry in the poultry yard, until all agreed that a Christmas tree would be a grand thing for the wild and tame alike. Like the men, they too would have a tree of their very own. But how to do it? Then the lion called a meeting of all the creatures, wild and tame. For the lion is king of beasts, and when he calls, they all must come. Too, that before and during and after these animal converses, there is a royal peace. The lamb can come to the meeting and sit down by the wolf, and the wolf dare not touch him. The dove may perch on the bough between the hawk and the owl, and neither will harm him. when the great king of beasts has summoned them all together to take counsel. But you know all about the rules of the animals, for you have read them in books, and you have seen the pictures, how the lion sits on his throne with a crown on one side of his head, and all the other creatures gather about, the elephant and giraffe, the hippopotamus, the buffalo, wolves and tigers and leopards, foxes and deer, goats and sheep, monkeys and orangutans, parrots and robins and turkeys, and swans and storks and eagles, and frogs and lizards and alligators, and all the rest besides. Then, when the lion had called the meeting to order, the swifts and the swallows told what they had seen, and a fat little pug dog with a ribbon and a silver bell about his neck wheezed out a story of a Christmas tree that he had seen, and how a silver bell had grown on that tree for him, and a whole box of the best sweets he had ever dreamed of, while he lay comfortably snoozing on his cushion before the fire. And a Persian cat, with her hair turned the wrong way, mewed out her story of a Christmas tree that she had attended, and told how there was a white mouse made of cream cheese for her creeping about beneath the branches. Then the monkeys chattered, and the elephants trumpeted, the horses neighed, the hyenas laughed, and each in his own way argued for a Christmas tree and told what he would do to help make it. The elephant would go into the forest and choose the tree and pull it up. The buffaloes would drag it in. The giraffe would fix the ornaments on the higher limbs because its neck was long. The monkeys would scramble up where the giraffe could not reach. The squirrels could run out on the slender twigs and help the monkeys. The birds would fly about and get the golden threads and put them on the tree with their beaks. The fireflies would hide themselves among the branches and sparkle like diamonds, and the glowworms promised to help the fireflies by playing candles, if someone would lift them up and put them on the branches. The parrots and paraquets and other birds of gay plumage would give feathers to hang among the branches, and the hummingbirds promised to flutter in and out among the twigs, and the sheep to give white wool to lie like snow among the boughs. Then the parrots screeched, and the peacocks screamed with delight, and you and I never could have told whether anybody voted aye or nay, but the lion knew, and the owl, for he was clerk, set it down in the minutes, as the lion bade him, that all the birds and beasts would do their part. So each planned what he could do. Even the little beetle, who makes great balls of earth, thought that if he could only once see one of those gay balls that grow on the children's Christmas tree, he might make some for the animals' tree. Different birds and beasts told of the oranges and apples and hollyberries, and who knows what they could get and hang upon the tree. You see, the animals came from many places, and then, too, they could send the carrier pigeons to go and bring fruit and berries, and who knows what besides from, so far away. Because the carrier pigeons can fly through the air, no one knows how fast or how far. Well, I cannot tell you everything that each one was going to do, but if you will go and get your Noah's Ark and take the animals out one by one, then you surely will think it out for yourself, for you have all the animals there. And so they arranged how they would ornament the tree, and the next thing was to decide what presents should be hung on the tree or put beneath its boughs, for each one must have his present. Well, after much discussion in roars and bellows, crows and croaks, lows and screams and bleats, and baas and grunts, and all the other sounds of birds and beast language, it was voted that each might choose the present he wished hung on the tree. The clerkly owl should call their names one by one, and each might declare his choice. So they began. The parrots and the macaws thought that they would like oranges and bananas and such things, which would look so pretty on the tree too, and so they were arranged for. The robins and the cedar birds chose cherries, the partridges, partridge berries, the squirrels, the red and gray and black, nuts and apples and pears. The monkeys said the popcorn strings would do for them, and the cats and dogs, remembering the Christmas gift which the pug dog and Persian cat had told about, asked for tiny mice made of cream cheese or chocolate. By and by it came the pig's turn to tell his choice. "Grunt, grunt," said the pig. "I want a nice pail of swill, hung on the very lowest bough of all." "Ugh," said the black leopard, so sleek and so clean. "Faugh," said the gazelle, with his dainty sense of smell. "Nay," said the horse, so daintily groomed. "What?" roared the lion. "What's that you want?" "A pail of swill," grunted the pig. "Each one has chosen what he wants, and I have a right to choose what I want." "But," roared the lion. Each one has chosen something beautiful to make the tree a joy to all. Grunt, grunt, said the pig. The parrots and macaws are going to have oranges and bananas, and the robins and the cedar birds red cherries, the partridges their berries, the squirrels nuts and apples and pears, the dog and the cat their cream and chocolate mice. They all have what they want to eat. Grunt, grunt, said he. I will have what I want to eat too, and what I want is a pail of swill. Now, you see it had been voted, as I told you, that each should have what he wanted hung on the tree for him, and so the lion could not help himself. If the pig chose swill, swill he must have, and angrily he had to roar. If the pig wants swill, a pail of swill he must have, hung on the lowest bough of the tree. Then the wolf's wicked eyes gleamed, for his turn was next, and he said, If the pig has swill because he wants swill to eat, I must have what I want to eat, and I want a tender lamb 6 months old. And at that all the lambs and the sheep bleated and baaed. Ha ha, barked the fox. Then I want a turkey, and the turkeys gobbled in fear. And I, said the tiger, want a yearling calf. And the cows and the calves lowed in horror. And I, said the owl, the clerk, I want a plump dove. And I, said the hawk, will take a rabbit. And I, said the leopard, want a deer or a gazelle. Then all was fear and uproar. The hares and rabbits scuttled into the grass. The gazelles and the deer bounded away. The sheep and the cattle crowded close together. The small birds rose in the air in flocks. And the Christmas tree was like to have come to grief and ended, not in Christmas joy, but in fear and hatred and terror. Then a little lamb stepped out and bleated, Ah, King Lion, it would be very sad if all the animals should lose their Christmas tree, for the very thought of that tree has brought us closer together, and here we are, wild and tame, fierce and timid, met together as friends. And oh, King Lion, rather than there should not be a tree, they may take me and hang me on it. Let them not take the turkeys and gazelles and the calves and the rabbits and all the rest that they have chosen. Let the tigers and leopards and wolves and foxes and eagles and hawks and owls and all their kind be content that their Christmas present shall be a lamb. And so we may come together again and have our happy Christmas tree, and each have what he wishes. But, said the lion, what will you have? If you give yourself, then you will have no Christmas present. Yes, said the lamb, I too shall have what I want, for I shall have brought them all together again, and made each one happy. Then a dove fluttered down from a tree and landed on the ground beside the lamb, and very timidly and softly she cooed, Take me too, King Lion, as the present for the owls and the hawks, and the weasels and minks, because for them a lamb is too big. I am the best present for them. Take me, King Lion. Then the lion roared, See what the lamb and the dove have done? My food, oh, tigers and leopards and wolves and eagles and all your kind, is like your food. But I would rather eat nothing from our Christmas tree than take this lamb or dove for my present. Then all the beasts kept still, because the lion roared so loud and angrily, and the birds that were flying away settled on the branches of the trees, and the gazelles stopped their running and turned their heads to listen, and the rabbits peeped out through the grass and brush where they had hid. Then the lion turned to the pig and roared, See this lamb and this dove? Are you not ashamed for what you have done? You have spoiled all our happiness. Will you take back your choice, you pig, or do you wish to ruin our Christmas tree? Grunt, grunt, said the pig. It is my right. I want something good. I don't care for your lambs and your doves. I want my swill. Then the lion roared again. Have all chosen? And all answered, Yes. Then, said the lion, it is my choice. And all said, It is. I love fat and tender pigs. I choose a pig for my Christmas gift, roared the lion. Did you ever hear a pig squeal? Oh, how that pig squealed then. And he got up on his fat little legs and tried to run away. But all the animals gathered around in a ring, and the hyenas laughed, and the jackals cried, and the dogs and the wolves and the foxes headed him off and hunted the poor pig back again. Then, when the pig found that he could not run away, he lay down on his back with his feet in the air, and squealed with all his might, Oh, I don't want the swill! Oh, I don't want the swill! I take it all back. I don't want anything." But at first no one heard him, because all were talking at once in their own way, barking and growling and roaring and chattering. But by and by the lion saw that the pig was squealing something, so he roared for silence, and then they all heard the pig squeal out that he did not want any swill. And the lion roared aloud, "You have heard! Has the owl recorded that the pig will have no swill?" "Yes," said the owl. "Then," said the lion, "record that the lion wants no pig." Then the tiger growled, "And I want no calf." And one by one the leopard and the eagle, the wolf and the fox, the hawk and owl, and all their kind took back their votes. And so it came about that the animals did have a Christmas tree after all, but instead of hanging lambs and doves upon the tree, they agreed that they could hang little images of lambs and doves, and other birds and animals too, perhaps. And by, the custom spread until the humans came to hang the same little images on their trees too. And when you see a little figure of a lamb or a dove on the Christmas tree, you may know that it is all because the lamb and the dove, by their unselfishness, saved the animals from strife, for neither thought what he wanted from the tree, but each was ready to give himself for the others, so that they might not fight and kill one another at the Christmas time. End of The Animals' Christmas Tree by John P. Peters.
'Twas the eve before Christmas. Good night had been said, and Annie and Willie had crept into bed. There were tears on their pillows and tears in their eyes, and each little bosom was heaving with sighs. For tonight their stern father's command had been given that they should retire precisely at 7, instead of at 8, for they troubled him more with questions unheard of than ever before. He had told them he thought this delusion a sin. No such creature as Santa Claus ever had been, and he hoped after this he should never more hear how he scrambled down chimneys with presents each year. And this was the reason that two little heads so restlessly tossed on their soft, downy beds. 8, 9, and the clock on the steeple told 10. Not a word had been spoken by either till then, when Willie's sad face from the blanket did peep, and whispered, "Dear Annie, is you fast asleep?" "Why, no, brother Willie," a sweet voice replies. "I've long tried in vain, but I can't shut my eyes, for somehow it makes me so sorry because dear papa has said there is no Santa Claus. Now we know there is, and it can't be denied, for he came every year before mamma died. But then I've been thinking that she used to pray, and God would hear everything mamma would say, and maybe she asked him to send Santa Claus here, with the sack full of presents he brought every year." "Well, why can't we pay just as mamma did then, and ask God to send him with presents again?" "I've been thinking so too," and without a word more, 4 little bare feet bounded out on the floor, and 4 little knees the soft carpet pressed, and 2 tiny hands were clasped close to each breast. "Now, Willie, you know we must firmly believe that the presents we ask for we're sure to receive. You must wait very still till I say the Amen, and by that you will know that your turn has come then. Dear Jesus, look down on my brother and me, and grant us the favor we're asking of thee. I want a wax dolly, a tea set and ring, and an ebony work-box that shuts with a spring. Bless Papa, dear Jesus, and cause him to see that Santa Claus loves us as much as does he. Don't let him get fretful and angry again at dear brother Willie and Annie. Amen." "Please, Jesus, let Santa Claus come down tonight, and bring us some presents before his eyes. I want you to give me a nice old set, with bright shining on it and all painted it, a box full of candy, a book and a toy. Amen. And then, Jesus, I'll be a good boy." Their prayers being ended, they raised up their heads, and with hearts light and cheerful again sought their beds. They were soon lost in slumber, both peaceful and deep, and with fairies in dreamland were roaming in sleep. 8, 9, and the little French clock had struck 10, ere the father had thought of his children again. He seems now to hear Annie's half-suppressed sighs, and to see the big tears stand in Willie's blue eyes. "I was harsh with my darlings," he mentally said, "and should not have sent them so early to bed. But then I was troubled, my feelings found vent, for bank stock today has gone down 10%. But of course they've forgotten their troubles ere this, and then I denied them the thrice-asked-for kiss. But just to make sure, I'll steal up to their door. To my darlings I never spoke harshly before." So saying, he softly ascended the stairs, and arrived at the door to hear both of their prayers. His Annie's "Bless Papa" drew forth the big tears, and Willie's grave promise fell sweet on his ears. "Strange, strange, I'd forgotten," said he with a sigh, "how I longed when a child to have Christmas draw nigh. I'll atone for my harshness," he inwardly said, "by answering their prayers ere I sleep in my bed." Then he turned to the stairs and softly went down, threw off velvet slippers and silk dressing-gown, donned hat, coat, and boots, and was out in the street, a millionaire facing the cold, driving sleet. Nor stopped he until he had bought everything, from the box full of candy to the tiny gold ring. Indeed, he kept adding so much to his store that the various presents outnumbered a score. Then homeward he turned, when his holiday load, with Aunt Mary's help, in the nursery was stowed. Miss Dolly was seated beneath a pine tree, by the side of a table spread out for her tea. A work-box, well filled, in the centre was laid, and on it the ring for which Annie had prayed. A soldier in uniform stood by a sled, with bright shining runners and all painted red. There were balls, dogs, and horses, books pleasing to see, and birds of all colours were perched in the tree, while Santa Claus, laughing, stood up in the top, as if getting ready more presents to drop. Now as the fond father the picture surveyed, he thought for his trouble he'd amply been paid, and he said to himself, as he brushed off a tear, "I'm happier tonight than I've been for a year. I've enjoyed more true pleasure than ever before. What care I if bank stock falls 10% more? Hereafter I'll make it a rule, I believe, to have Santa Claus visit us each Christmas Eve." So thinking, he gently extinguished the light, and, tripping downstairs, retired for the night. As soon as the beams of the bright morning sun put the darkness to flight, and the stars, one by one, 4 little blue eyes out of sleep opened wide, and at the same moment the presents espied. Then out of their beds they sprang with a bound, and the very gifts prayed for were all of them found. They laughed and they cried in their innocent glee, and shouted for Papa to come quick and see what presents old Santa Claus brought in the night, just the things that they wanted, and left before light. "And now," added Annie, in voice soft and low, "you'll believe there's a Santa Claus, Papa, I know," while dear little Willie climbed up on his knee, determined no secret between them should be, and told in soft whispers how Annie had said that their dear blessed mamma, so long ago dead, used to kneel down and pray by the side of her chair, and that God up in heaven had answered her prayer. "Then we got up and paid dust as well as we could, and God answered our prayers. Now wasn't he good?" "I should say that he was, if he sent you all these, and knew just what presents my children would please. Well, well, let him think so, the dear little elf. 'Twould be cruel to tell him I did it myself. Blind Father, who caused your stern heart to relent, and the hasty words spoken so soon to repent, 'twas the being who bade you steal softly upstairs, and made you his agent to answer their prayers. End of Annie and Willie's Prayer by Sophia P. Snow.
It was Christmas Eve, and the family circle of Luke Steffink, Esquire, was aglow with the amiability and random mirth which the occasion demanded. A long and lavish dinner had been partaken of. Waits had been round and sung carols. The house party had regaled itself with more caroling on its own account. And there had been romping which, even in a pulpit reference, could not have been condemned as ragging. In the midst of the general glow, however, there was one black, unkindled cinder. Bertie Steffink, nephew of the aforementioned Luke, had early in life adopted the profession of ne'er-do-weel. His father had been something of the kind before him. At the age of 18, Bertie had commenced that round of visits to our colonial possessions, so seemly and desirable in the case of a prince of the blood, so suggestive of insincerity in a young man of the middle class. He had gone to grow tea in Ceylon and fruit in British Columbia, and to help sheep to grow wool in Australia. At the age of 20, he had just returned from some similar errand in Canada, from which it may be gathered that the trial he gave to these various experiments was of the summary drumhead nature. Luke Steffink, who fulfilled the troubled role of guardian and deputy parent to Bertie, deplored the persistent manifestation of the homing instinct on his nephew's part, and his solemn thanks earlier in the day for the blessing of reporting a united family had no reference to Bertie's return. Arrangements had been promptly made for packing the youth off to a distant corner of Rhodesia, whence return would be a difficult matter. The journey to this uninviting destination was imminent. In fact, a more careful and willing traveler would have already begun to think about his packing. Hence, Bertie was in no mood to share in the festive spirit which displayed itself around him, and resentment smoldered within him at the eager, self-absorbed discussion of social plans for the coming months, which he heard on all sides. Beyond depressing his uncle and the family circle generally by singing "C'est au revoir" and not "goodbye," he had taken no part in the evening's conviviality. 11 o'clock had struck some half-hour ago, and the elder Steffinks began to throw out suggestions leading up to that process which they called retiring for the night. "Come, Teddy, it's time you were in your little bed, you know," said Luke Steffink to his 13-year-old son. "That's where we all ought to be," said Mrs. Steffink. "There wouldn't be room," said Bertie. The remark was considered to border on the scandalous. Everybody ate raisins and almonds with the nervous industry of sheep feeding during threatening weather. "In Russia," said Horace Bordenby, who was staying in the house as a Christmas guest, "I've read that the peasants believe that if you go into a cow-house or stable at midnight on Christmas Eve, you will hear the animals talk. They're supposed to have the gift of speech at that one moment of the year." "Oh, do let's all go down to the cow-house and listen to what they've got to say," exclaimed Beryl, to whom anything was thrilling and amusing if you did it in a troop. Mrs. Steffink made a laughing protest, but gave a virtual consent by saying, "We must all wrap up well, then." The idea seemed a scatterbrained one to her, and almost heathenish, but if afforded an opportunity for throwing the young people together, and as such she welcomed it. Mr. Horace Bordenby was a young man with quite substantial prospects, and he had danced with Beryl at a local subscription ball a sufficient number of times to warrant the authorized inquiry on the part of the neighbors whether there was anything in it. Though Mrs. Steffink would not have put it in so many words, she shared the idea of the Russian peasantry that on this night the beast might speak. The cow-house stood at the junction of the garden with a small paddock, an isolated survival in a suburban neighborhood of what had once been a small farm. Luke Steffink was complacently proud of his cowhouse and his 2 cows. He felt that they gave him a stamp of solidity, which no number of Wyandottes or Orpingtons could impart. They even seemed to link him in a sort of inconsequent way with those patriarchs who derived importance from their floating capital of flocks and herbs, he-asses and she-asses. It had been an anxious and momentous occasion when he had to decide definitively between the buyer and the ranch for the naming of his villa residence. A December midnight was hardly the moment he would have chosen for showing his farm building to visitors. But since it was a fine night, and the young people were anxious for an excuse for a mild frolic, Luke consented to chaperone the expedition. The servants had long since gone to bed, so the house was left in charge of Bertie, who scornfully declined to stir out on the pretext of listening to bovine conversation. "We must go quietly," said Luke, as he headed the procession of giggling young folk, brought up in the rear by the shawled and hooded figure of Mrs. Steffink. "I've always laid stress on keeping this a quiet and orderly neighborhood." It was a few minutes to midnight when the party reached the cowhouse and made its way in by the light of Luke's stable lantern. For a moment, everyone stood in silence, almost with the feeling of being in church. Daisy, the one lying down, is by a short-horned bull out of a Guernsey cow, announced Luke in a hushed voice, which was in keeping with the foregoing impression. "Is she?" said Bordenby, rather as if he had expected her to be by Rembrandt. Myrtle's family history was cut short by a little scream from the women of the party. The cow-house door had closed noiselessly behind them, and the key had turned gratingly in the lock. Then they heard Bertie's voice pleasantly wishing them good night, and his footsteps retreating along the garden path. Luke Steffink strode to the window. It was a small square opening of the old-fashioned sort, with iron bars let into the stonework. "Unlock the door this instant," he shouted, with as much air of menacing authority as a hen might assume when screaming through the bars of a coop at a marauding hawk. In reply to his summons, the hall door closed with a defiant bang. A neighboring clock struck the hour of midnight. If the cows had received the gift of human speech at that moment, they would not have been able to make themselves heard. 7 or 8 other voices were engaged in describing Bertie's present conduct and his general character at a high pressure of excitement and indignation. In the course of half an hour or so, everything that it was permissible to say about Bertie had been said some dozens of times, and other topics began to come to the front. The extreme mustiness of the cowhouse, the possibility of it catching fire, and the probability of it being a row-town house for the vagrant rats of the neighborhood. And still no sign of deliverance came to the unwilling vigil-keepers. Towards 1 o'clock, the sound of rather boisterous and undisciplined carol-singing approached rapidly and came to a sudden anchorage, apparently just outside the garden gate. A motorload of youthful bloods, in a high state of conviviality, had made a temporary halt for repairs. The stoppage, however, did not extend to the vocal efforts of the party, and the watchers in the cowshed were treated to a highly unauthorized rendering of Good King Wenceslas, in which the adjective good appeared to be very carelessly applied. The noise had the effect of bringing Bertie out into the garden, but he utterly ignored the pale, angry faces peering out at the cowhouse window, and concentrated his attention on the revelers outside the gate. "Wassail, you chaps," he shouted. "Wassail, old sport," they shouted back. "We jolly well drink your health, only we've nothing to drink it in." "Come and wassail inside," said Bertie hospitably. "I'm all alone, and there's heaps of wet." They were total strangers, but his touch of kindness made them instantly his kin. In another moment, the unauthorized version of King Wenceslas, which, like so many other scandals, grew worse on repetition, went echoing up the garden path. Two of the revelers gave an impromptu performance on the way by executing the staircase walls up the terraces of what Luke Steffink hitherto, with some justification, called his rock garden. The rock part of it was still there when the walls had been accorded its third encore. Luke, more than ever like a cooped hen behind the cowhouse bars, was in a position to realize the feelings of concert-goers unable to countermand the call for an encore which they neither desire or deserve. The hall door closed with a bang on Bertie's guests, and the sound of merriment became faint and muffled to the weary watchers at the other end of the garden. Presently, two ominous pops in quick succession made themselves distinctly heard. "They've got at the champagne," exclaimed Mrs. Steffink. "Perhaps it's the sparkling Moselle," said Luke hopefully. 3 or 4 more pops were heard. "The champagne and the sparkling Moselle," said Mrs. Steffink. Luke uncorked an expletive which, like brandy in a temperance household, was only used on rare emergencies. Mr. Horace Bordenby had been making use of similar expressions under his breath for a considerable time past. The experiment of throwing the young people together had been prolonged beyond a point when it was likely to produce any romantic result. Some 40 minutes later, the hall door opened and disgorged a crowd that had thrown off any restraint of shyness that might have influenced its earlier actions. Its vocal efforts in the direction of carol singing were now supplemented by instrumental music. A Christmas tree that had been prepared for the children of the gardener and other household retainers had yielded a rich spoil of tin trumpets, rattles, and drums. The life story of King Wenceslas had been dropped. Luke was thankful to notice. But it was intensely irritating for the chilled prisoners in the cowhouse to be told that it was a hot time in the old town tonight, together with some accurate but entirely superfluous information as to the imminence of Christmas morning. Judging by the protests which began to be shouted from the upper windows of neighboring houses, the sentiments prevailing in the cowhouse were heartily echoed in other quarters. The revelers found their car, and what was more remarkable, managed to drive off in it, with a parting fanfare of tin trumpets. The lively beat of a drum disclosed the fact that the master of the revels remained on the scene. "Bertie!" came in an angry, imploring chorus of shouts and screams from the cowhouse window. "Hello!" cried the owner of the name, turning his rather errant steps in the direction of the summons. "Are you people still there? Must have heard everything cows got to say by this time. If you haven't, no use waiting. After all, it's a Russian legend, and Russian Christmas Eve not due for another fortnight. Better come out." After 1 or 2 ineffectual attempts, he managed to pitch the key of the cowhouse door in through the window. Then, lifting his voice in the strains of "I'm Afraid to Go Home in the Dark," with a lusty drum accompaniment, he led the way back to the house. The hurried procession of the released that followed in his steps came in for a good deal of the adverse comment that his exuberant display had evoked. It was the happiest Christmas Eve he had ever spent. To quote his own words, he had a rotten Christmas. End of Bertie's Christmas Eve by Saki.
Mrs. Brownlow's Christmas party. It was fine Christmas weather. Several light snowstorms in the early part of December had left the earth fair and white and sparkling. Cold days that followed were enough to make the most crabbed and morose of mankind cheerful, as with a foretaste of the joyous season at hand. Downtown the sidewalks were crowded with mothers and sisters buying gifts for their sons, brothers, and husbands, who found it impossible to get anywhere by taking the ordinary course of foot travel, and were obliged to stalk along the snowy streets beside the curbstone in a sober but not ill-humored row. Among those who were looking forward to the holidays with keen anticipations of pleasure were Mr. and Mrs. Brownlow of Elm Street, Boston. They had quietly talked the matter over together and decided that, as there were 3 children in the family, not counting themselves as they might well have done, it would be a delightful and not too expensive luxury to give a little Christmas party. "You see, John," said Miss Brownlow, "we've been asked ourselves to half a dozen candy pulls and parties since we've lived here, and it seems nothing but fair that we should do it ourselves once." "That's so, Clarissy," her husband replied slowly, "but then there's so many of us, and my salary's, well, it would cost considerable, little woman, wouldn't it?" "I'll tell you what," she exclaimed, "we needn't have a regular grown-up party, but just one for children. We can get a small tree and a bit of present for each of the boys and girls, with ice cream and cake, and let it go at that. The whole thing shouldn't cost $10. "Good," said Mr. Brownlow heartily. "I knew you'd get some way out of it. Let's tell Bob and Sue and Polly so they can have the fun of looking forward to it." So it was settled, and all hands entered into the plan with such a degree of earnestness that one would have thought these people were going to have some grand gift themselves, instead of giving to others, and pinching for a month afterwards and their own comforts, as they knew they would have to do. The first real difficulty they met is in deciding whom to invite. John was for the asking only of the children of their immediate neighbors, but Miss Brownlow said it would be a kindness, as well as polite, to include those who were better off than themselves. "I always think, John," she explained, laying her hand on his shoulder, "that it's just so much despising to look down on your rich neighbors, as if all they got was money, as on your poor ones. Let's ask 'em all, Deacon Wholesome's, the Brights, and the Nortons." The Brights were Mr. Brownlow's employers. "Anybody else?" queried her husband with his funny twinkle. "Perhaps you'd like to have me ask the governor's family, Jordan and Marsh?" "Now, John, don't you be saucy," she laughed, relieved at having carried her point. "Let's put our heads together and see who to set down. Susie will write the notes in her nice hand, and Bob can deliver them to save postage." "Well, you've said 3, counted Mr. Brownlow on his fingers. Then there's Mrs. Sampson's little girl, and the 4 Williamses, and—" He enumerated one family after another till nearly 30 names were on the list. Once Susie broke in, "Oh, Pa, don't invite that Mary Spinfield. She's awfully stuck up and cross." "Good," said her father again. "This will be just the thing for her. Let her be coffee and you be sugar, and see how much you can sweeten her that evening." In the few days that intervened before the 25th, the whole family were busy enough, Mrs. Brownlow shopping, Susie writing the notes, and the others helping wherever they got the chance. Every evening they spread out upon the sitting-room floor such presents as had been bought during the day. These were not costly, but they were chosen lovingly and seemed very nice indeed to Mr. Brownlow and the children, who united in praising the discriminating taste of Mrs. B, as with justifiable pride she sat in the center of the room, bringing forth her purchases from the depths of a capricious carpet-bag. The grand final expenditure was left until the day before Christmas. Mr. Brownlow got off from his work early, with his month's salary in his pocket, and a few kind words from his employers tucked away even more securely in his warm heart. He had taken special pains to include their children for his party, and he was quietly enjoying the thought of making them happy on the morrow. By a preconcerted plan he met Mrs. Brownlow under the great Golden Eagle at the corner of Summit and Washington Streets, and having thus joined forces, the two proceeded in company toward a certain wholesale toy shop where Mr. Brownlow was acquainted and where they expected to secure such small articles as they desired at dozen rates. And now Mr. Brownlow realized what must have been his wife's exertions during the last fortnight, for having gallantly relieved her of her carpet-bag and offered his unoccupied arm for her support, he was constantly engaged in a struggle to maintain his hold upon either one or the other of his charges, and rescuing them with extreme difficulty from the crowd. At one time he was simultaneously attacked on both vulnerable points, a very stout woman persisting in thrusting herself between him and his already bulging carpet-bag on the one hand, and an equally persistent old gentleman engaged in separating Mrs. Brownlow from him on the other. With flushed but determined face, he held on to both with all his might, when a sudden stampede, to avoid a passing team, brought such a violent pressure upon him that he found both Clarissa and the bag dragged from him, while he himself was borne at least a rod away before he could stem the tide. Fortunately, the stout woman immediately fell over the bag, and Mr. Brownlow, having by this means identified the spot where it lay, hewed his way, figuratively speaking, to his wife, and bore her off triumphantly. At last, to the relief of both, they reached the entrance of the toy dealer's huge store. Mr. Brownlow at once hunted up his friend, and all three set about a tour of the premises. It was beyond doubt a wonderful place. A little retail shop in the Christmas holidays is of itself a marvel, but this immense establishment, at the back doors of which stood wagons constantly receiving cases on cases of goods directed to all parts of the country, was quite another thing. Such long passageways there were, walled in from floor to ceiling with boxes of picture blocks labeled in German, such mysterious, gloomy alcoves, by the sides of which lurked innumerable wild animals with glaring eyes and rigid tails, such fleets of Noah's Ark, wherein were bestowed the patriarch's whole family in tight-fitting garments of yellow and red, and specimens of all creation, so promiscuously packed together that it must have been extremely depressing to all concerned. Such a delirious smell of sawdust and paint and wax, and short of such presentation of toy in the abstract, and toy in particular, and toy overhead and underfoot and in the air, could never have existed outside of Cotlow and Company's manufacturers, dealers, and importers of toys. Mrs. Brownlow was fairly at her wits' end to choose, when she meekly inquired for 10 soldiers. Solid regiments of them sprang up, like Jason's armed men, at her bidding. At the suggestion of a doll, the world seemed suddenly and solely peopled with these little creatures, and winking, crying, walking and talking dolls crowded about the bewildered customers, dolls with flaxen hair and dolls with no hair at all, dolls of imposing proportions when viewed in front, but of no thickness to speak of when held sideways, dolls as rigid as mummies, and dolls who exhibited an alarming tendency to double their arms and legs up backward. To add to this confusion, the air was filled with the noise of trumpets, drums, musical boxes, and other instruments, which were being tested in various parts of the building, until poor Mrs. Brownlow declared she should go distracted. At length, however, she and her husband, with the assistance of their polite friend, succeeded in selecting 2 or 3 dozen small gifts, and, when the last purchase was concluded, started for home. After a walk of 10 minutes, they reached Boylston Market, where they were at once beset by vendors of evergreen and holly wreaths, crosses and stars of every description. Mr. Brownlow bought 6 of the cheaper sort of wreaths, which the owner kindly threaded upon his arm, as if they were a sort of huge, fragrant beads. Then he selected a tree, and after a short consultation with Mrs. Brownlow, decided to carry it home himself, to save a quarter. A horse car opportunely passing, they boarded it, Mrs. Brownlow and her bag being with some difficulty squeezed in through the rear door, and Mr. Brownlow taking his stand upon the front platform, from which the tree, which had been tightly tied up, projected like a bowsprit until they reached home. Great was the bustle at 17 Elm Street that night. Parcels were unwrapped, the whole house was pleasantly redolent of boiling molasses, and from the kitchen there came at the same time a scratchy and poppy sound, denoting the preparation of mounds of feathery corn. Bob and his father took themselves upon the uprearing of the tree. On being carried to the parlor, it was found to be at least 3 feet too long, and Mr. Brownlow, in his shirt sleeves, accomplished wonders with the saw, smearing himself in the process with pitch from head to foot. The tree seemed at first inclined to be sulky, perhaps having been decapitated and curtailed, for it obstinately leaned backwards, kicked over the soap-box in which it was set, bumped against Mr. Brownlow, tumbled forward, and, in short, behaved itself like a tree which was determined to lie on its precocious back all the next day, or perish in the attempt. At length, just as they were beginning to despair of ever getting it firm and straight, it gave a little quiver of its limbs, yielded gracefully to a final push by Bob, and stood upright, as fair and comely a tree as one would wish to see. Mr. Brownlow crept out backward from under the branches, thereby throwing his hair into the wildest confusion and adding more pitch to himself, and regarded it with a sigh of content. Such presents as were to be disposed of in this way were now hung upon the branches, then strings of popcorn, bits of wool, and glistening paper, a few red apples, and lastly the candles. When all was finished, which was not before midnight, the family withdrew to their beds, with weary limbs and brains, but with light-hearted anticipation of tomorrow. "Do you suppose Miss Bright will come with her children, John?" asked Miss Brownlow as she turned out the gas. "Shouldn't wonder," sleepily from the four-poster. "Did Mr. Bright say anything about the invitation we sent when he paid you off?" Silence. More silence. Good Mr. Brownlow was asleep, and Clarissa soon followed him. Meanwhile the snow, which had been falling fast during the early part of the evening, had ceased, leaving the earth as fair to look upon as the fleece-drifted sky above it. Slowly the heavy banks of cloud rolled away, disclosing star after star, until the moon itself looked down and sent a soft Merry Christmas to mankind. At last came the dawn, with the glorious burst of sunlight and church bells and glad voices, ushering in the gladdest and dearest day of all the year. The Brownlows were early astir, full of the joyous spirit of the day. There was a clamor of Christmas greetings and a delighted melody of shouts from the children over the few simple gifts that had been secretly laid aside for them. But the ruling thought in every heart was the party. It was to come off at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, when it would be just dark enough to light the candles on the tree. In spite of all the hard work of the preceding days, there was not a moment to spare that forenoon. The house, as the head of the family facetiously remarked, was a perfect hive of bees. As the appointed hour drew near, their nervousness increased. The children had been scrubbed from top to toe and dressed in their very best clothes. Mrs. Brownlow wore a cap with lavender ribbons, which she had a misgiving were too gaudy for a person of her sedate years. Nor was the excitement confined to the interior of the house. The tree was placed in the front parlor, close to the window, and by 4:30, a dozen raggedy children were gathered about the iron fence of the little front yard, gazing open-mouthed and open-eyed at the spectacular wonders from within. At 5:15, Mrs. Brownlow's heart beat hard every time she heard a strange footstep in their quiet street. It was a little odd that none of the guests had arrived, but then it was fashionable to be late. 10 minutes more passed, Still no arrivals. It was evident that each was planning not to be the first to get there, and that they would all descend on the house and assault the doorbell at once. Mrs. Brownlow repeatedly smoothed the wrinkles out of her tidy apron, and Mr. Brownlow began to perspire with responsibility. Meanwhile, the crowd outside, recognizing no rigid bonds of etiquette, rapidly increased in numbers. Mr. Brownlow, to pass the time and to please the poor little homeless creatures, lighted 2 of the candles. The response from the front yard fence was immediate. A low murmur of delight ran along the line, and several dull-eyed babies were hoisted in the arms of babies scarcely older than themselves to behold the rare vision of candles in a tree, just illuminating the further splendors glistening here and there among the branches. The kind man's heart warmed toward them, and he lighted 2 more candles. The delight of the audience could now hardly be restrained, and the babies, having been temporarily lowered by the arching little arms of their respective nurses, were shot up once more to view the redoubled grandeur. The whole family had become so much interested in these small outcasts that they had not noticed the flight of time. Now someone glanced at the clock and exclaimed, "It's nearly 5:30." The Brownlows looked at one another blankly. Poor Mrs. Brownlow's smart ribbons drooped in conscious abasement, while mortification and pride struggled in their wearer's kindly face, over which, after a moment's silence, one large tear slowly rolled and dropped off. Mr. Brownlow gave himself a little shake and sat down, as was his wont upon critical occasions. As his absent gaze wandered about the room, so prettily decked for the guests who didn't come, it fell upon a little worn, gilded-edged volume on the table. At that sight a new thought occurred to him. "Clarissy," he said softly, going over to his wife and putting an arm around her. "Clarissy, seein's the well-off folks haven't accepted, don't you think we better invite some of the others in?" And he pointed significantly toward the window. Mrs. Brownlow, dispatching another tear after the first, nodded. She was not quite equal to words yet. Being a woman, the neglect of her little party cut her even more deeply than it did her husband. Mr. Brownlow stepped to the front door. Nay, more, he walked down the short flight of steps, took one little girl by the hand, and said in his pleasant, fatherly way, "Wouldn't you like to go in and look at the tree? Come, Puss," to the waif at his side. "We'll start first." With these words he led the way back through the open door and into the warm, lighted room. The children hung back a little, but seeing that no harm came to the first guest, soon flocked in, each trying to keep behind all the rest, but at the same time shouldering the babies up into view as before. In the delightful confusion that followed, the good hosts forgot all about the miscarriage of their plans. They completely outdid themselves in efforts to please their hastily acquired company. Bob spoke a piece, the girls sang duets. Mrs. Brownlow had held every individual baby in her motherly arms before half an hour was over. As for Mr. Brownlow, it was simply marvelous to see him go among those children, giving them the presents and initiating their owners into the mysterious, impelling forces of monkeys with yellow legs and gymnastic tendencies, filling the boys' pockets with popcorn, blowing horns, and tin whistles. Now assaulting the tree, it had been lighted throughout, and, blessed, how firm it stood now, for fresh novelties, now diving into the kitchen and returning in an unspeakable, cohesive state of breathlessness and molasses candy, all the while laughing, talking, patting heads, joking, until the kindly spirit of Christmas present would have wept and smiled at once for the pleasure of the sight. "And now, my young friends," said Mr. Brownlow, raising his voice, "we'll have a little ice cream in the back room. Ladies first, gentlemen afterward." So saying, he gallantly stood on one side, with a sweep of his hand to allow Mrs. Brownlow to precede him. But just as the words left his mouth, there came a sharp ring at the doorbell. It's a carriage, gasped Miss Brownlow, flying to the front window and backing precipitously. Susie, go to the door and see who it is. Land's sakes, what a mess this parlor's in. And she gazed with a true housekeeper's dismay at the littered carpet and dripping candles. Deacon Wholesome and Mrs. Hartwell, Pa, announced Susie, throwing open the parlor door. The lady thus mentioned came forward with outstretched hand. Glancing a glimpse of Mrs. Brownlow's embarrassed face, she exclaimed quickly, "Isn't this splendid? Father and I were just driving past and we saw your tree through the window and couldn't resist dropping in upon you. You won't mind us, will you?" "Mind you?" repeated Mrs. Brownlow in astonishment. "Why, of course not, only you're so late. We didn't expect." Mrs. Hartwell looked puzzled. "Pardon me? I don't think I quite understand." "The invitation was for 5, you know, ma'am." "But we received no invitation." Mr. Brownlow, who had greeted the deacon heartily and then listened with amazement to this conversation, now turned upon Bob with a signaling futile attempt at a withering glance. Bob looked as puzzled as the rest for a moment. Then his face fell and he flushed to the roots of his hair. I must have forgot," he stammered. "Forgotten what?" "The invitations. They're in my desk now." Thus Bob, with utterly despairing tone and self-abasement. Mrs. Hartwell's silvery little laugh rang out. It was as near moonlight playing on the upper keys of an organ as anything you can imagine, and grasped Mrs. Brownlow's hand. "You poor dear," she cried, kissing her hostess, who stood speechless, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. "So that's why nobody came. But who is cluttered? Who has been having such a good time here, then?" Mr. Brownlow silently led the last 2 arrivals to the door of the next room and pointed in. It was now the kind deacon's turn to be touched. "Into the highways," he murmured, as he looked upon the unwashed, hungry little circle about the table. "Yes, I suppose," said Mr. Brownlow doubtfully. "They'd like to have you sit down with them, just as if they were folks, if you didn't mind." "Mind? I wish you could have seen the rich furs and overcoat come off and go down on the floor in a heap before Polly could catch them." When they were all seated, Mr. Brownlow looked over to the deacon, and he asked a blessing on the little ones gathered there. "Thy servants, the masters of this house, have suffered them to come unto thee," he said in his prayer. "Wilt thou take them into thine arms, O Father of lights, and bless them?" A momentary hush followed, and then the fun began. Sweetly and swiftly kind words flew back and forth across the table, each one carrying its own golden thread and weaving the hearts of poor and rich into the one fine fabric of brotherhood and humanity they were meant to form. Outside, the snow began to fall once more, each crystal flake whispering softly as it touched the earth, that Christmas night, peace, peace. End of Mrs. Brownlow's Christmas Party by Willis Boyd Allen.